I'm Shannon.
And I'm Mark.
And this is Dirt Sailor the Podcast. On this episode of Dirt Sailor the Podcast, we will be discussing Ukraine, New Jersey, FBI statistics, our soldiers, our sailors, barracks, Boeing, Fairfax schools, and a new Canadian law. Happy Throat Punch Thursday.
Well, happy Throat Punch Thursday.
How are you doing on this fine day?
I'm doing great. So that $36,000, you haven't even gotten my bill yet.
Right? Oh my goodness, I can only imagine what my solar bill is going to be when you add on your fee.
Yeah, that home-cooked meal is going to be pretty expensive.
Absolutely. The finest steak in all
Well,
of
a
the
year ago,
world.
I'd say a Wagyu. Now I'll say no goo.
No goo for you,
No
goo?
Wagyu for me goo. So let's start off talking about what we just started talking about before the microphones went live.
What
Pacific Gas and
specifically?
Electric,
Okay.
which is our
Only
utility company. It's our
util-
only choice in the valley here in Fresno. We have no alternative choice.
Yes, and as you noted last week, Pacific got you electric because they got us.
Yes, because they got us by the short hairs. Well, not only do they have us by the short hairs, I was listening to a local talk show radio host, and you'll know who I'm talking about because he's been on the radio here in Fresno on KMJ for about 40 years. So
Mr. Ray?
Yes, Mr. Ray. He was talking about utility rates by nation and by county and by city and on and on and on. And
Okay, so he did some breakdown.
he did some breakdown, and unfortunately I had to go back to work, so I didn't get to listen to the whole thing. The gist of it is here in Fresno County, city of Fresno, our electric rates are 140%-ish higher than anywhere else in the nation. That's one.
Okay, 140% higher. Got it.
Yes. Right down the road, I believe it was Taft or somewhere in that general location. Now, I thought Taft was SoCal Edison. Maybe they're not. Maybe they're PG&E, and maybe I have the town, the T, wrong. I'll have to look it up and verify. Their rates are 240% higher than the national average. Why? Is it because of the fires? Is it because they like their retirements? Is it because we're paying the CEO of PG&E
$50 million.
the highest salary, I think, of any utility
In the United
United States? What is the sum total of the parts here, and what is their justification, their legitimate justification for charging people from low-income housing to the wealthiest people here these kind of exorbitant rates?
They have no excuses. They just get to. They have lined Newsom's pocket, and they get to keep on keeping on. They have no excuses. They try to say, oh, we need to bury lines. But yet when they are making money, they're not spending that burying lines. When they are putting in new housing areas that are going to be serviced by PG&E, one thing I've noticed about all of these new housing areas, they're not burying those lines. They're not starting by burying lines.
You're right, and I do recall a few years ago, I think there was a fire somewhere in the Bay Area from buried lines, gas lines, an explosion.
Yes.
They were saying that they were outdated, antiquated, and they needed to be replaced. Well, that's on you guys to provide the proper maintenance and do the actual exchange from old gas lines to new.
Now, I'm sure they're going to say because California has mandated that we go green and get our energy from green sources and build up green energy efforts, that they've been limited in how they can spend their money, and they've been laying out so much money to go green. Well, I would say if they've been laying out that money and we still have problems, it hasn't been working, not money well spent. So if they want to go back and say, hey, this is the fault of your elected officials, then come out with it. But do you think that they're going to blame the person that ultimately wrote off all of their wrongdoing in Paradise and other locations?
Absolutely not. And I guess some court system somewhere or some executive group has asked for the secret tapes or the transcripts of the secret meetings between our governor and PG&E executives.
Well, I'm sure they're just going to go up in smoke.
Yes, what's going to happen is they'll call Hillary, say, hey, how do you get rid of these? Well, I used bleach bit and a 12-ounce claw hammer from Lowe's, and they worked pretty well. So you might try that avenue.
Yeah, they'll do, well, apparently they could potentially do what Boeing has done. I guess there was video footage, kind of segueing here, but I guess there was video footage of exactly who worked on the 737 MAX 9 door that flew off that Alaska Airlines flight. And that video footage, as requested by the NTSB and others, has been erased.
You know what else has been erased?
What else has been erased?
The Boeing whistleblower.
Oh, yes. He got Epstein. So maybe they've already started talking to Hillary Clinton about how to get rid of a witness that doesn't jive with how they want to run things in the future.
Well, I didn't know that Boeing had mafia-type ties. That because of their wrongdoings and their inability to follow safety protocols that could potentially cost the lives of one person in an airplane to 300, that the best fix is to kill your leaker.
Right, and he was talking about multiple different areas that remain flawed for aircraft. And unfortunately, he whistleblows, gets out there to the highest of highs trying to tell his story about how he retired. He could have gone away and just enjoyed his retirement, but he still could not live with the bad stuff that was happening. And I don't think he wanted to retire. I believe he kind of got pushed into it because he got on their nerves for whistleblowing. But yes, who are they connected to? Who is Boeing connected to? That whistleblowing on a safety issue, that we've been able to see the problem with our own eyes, that there is a problem, because it's the door on Alaska. It's landing, a United flight just had a wheel fall off. And then there was a third one that just happened.
Well, some of those are maintenance issues.
Yes, it's not all Boeing.
It's human factors and human error on the ground and in the repair shops. But, the one with the door is a simple fix. Put out an AD, tell the guys, you know what? Go put the bolts in the doors and the nuts and torque them and safety them. It's not rocket science here.
Right. We have found out that this seems to be a more than one problem. So you know what? We're going to put it out nationwide or worldwide in some cases. For instance, when they had the autopilot error with these these Maxes,
yes.
where they kept trying to turn on the autopilot and it was a
pedo
device. And they came out and they had to ground all the planes. They had to figure it out. And they went forward with it. Okay, so let's figure this out, instead of, no, we don't want somebody to say we were doing bad things, we were hiding bad things, we were letting it happen anyway. And mafia ties are there.
Well, some kind of ties. I don't know if it's mafia ties, drug lord ties. They're hooked into someone. And by the way, Boeing, this podcast is broadcast from the far reaches of the earth. We are at the North Pole at the present time. So,
if you're looking for someone.
Yes.
So the one that I was trying to think of was on the 787. They need to check cockpit seats after a mishap on a Latin flight. And the flight attendant hit a seat switch that pushed the pilot into the controls during...
Yes, caused him to push the controls forward.
Yes, so how is it that, this could have happened? Hey, like you said, sometimes accidents happen, sometimes through no fault of anybody's own. They thought, or it kind of turns into like an everybody needs to be responsible for everybody else sort of thing. Hey, I figured out that even though our design and our plans say to ratchet this down to this level or make sure that there's 4 bolts in every, right facing seat, whatever you want to do, it turns out that 5 bolts gives us the maximum safety, or it turns out that this plastic that we're ordering to make pieces inside the fuselage feels different. It looks different. It's not like anything I ever saw before. So instead of being a person that just keeps installing stuff, you're like, hey, manager, I think we need to check this out. Well, you need to be able to say that.
Sorry for stuttering.
You're fine.
They need to use that plastic that we used during COVID to put up at Costco and other stores, other department stores that stop that thing dead in its tracks.
Oh, yes.
That stuff would work really well on airplanes for aircraft safety.
It absolutely would.
Just kidding, people.
No, but the reality is you need to be able to speak up. So this manager, this supervisor, he spoke up and they wanted to shut him down. And ultimately, as he's whistleblowing, his family has come out and said that he was not suicidal and that he had basically said, if it's ever indicated that I committed suicide, that no dice.
It's not true. Yeah, I am not suicidal. I'm not going to commit suicide, but if I happen to commit suicide, I didn't do it.
Yes. Just like with Jeffrey Epstein, he was, I think the next day or a day later, he was potentially going to get bail. He was going to get access to bail. And so why is it that you would kill yourself right before you get access to bail or potential access to bail? Why wouldn't you do it if you got denied? Like, it doesn't make sense.
Wasn't there just a stabbing of somebody in jail too from a guy that wasn't even Hispanic, but he was in a Mexican gang?
Yes. Yeah. And he stabbed he used to work for the FBI. He was an informant. And he ended up stabbing Chauvin from Minnesota. So they moved him from the closest prison near where his family would be able to visit him to Arizona. And this prison is the same one where somebody snuck in a gun and then attempted to shoot a visitor. An inmate attempted to shoot a visitor. Same prison.
I'd say we have some interesting cast of characters around the world, around our U.S., in our prison systems, working for the prisons, prisoners in the prison systems. It's amazing what happens. You would think being on lockdown, especially for, 10 to life, 20 to life, and then you're a couple years away from getting out, then miraculously you're still working for the FBI. So I wonder what they promised him behind the scenes, what someone promised him. Not necessarily the FBI. I'm not saying that. Don't get me wrong. I speak off the cuff sometimes, so I know you have good tracking and geofencing, FBI, but we're currently podcasting from Antarctica.
Yeah, we moved. We were actually mid-flight, and we moved from...
We move around quite a bit.
We do.
I'm pretty good about bouncing this signal from place to place. You know who needs to check her signals?
Who needs to check her signals?
Is our Justice, Ketanji Brown Jackson.
Why does Ketanji Brown Jackson need to check her signals?
She has raised everybody's eyebrows, making a comment that the First Amendment hamstrings the government.
What does she mean by the First Amendment hamstrings the government?
It's a good question, but I believe it has to do with censorship from big tech companies and our federal government.
Oh, I believe there was a case that was just heard this week where I don't remember who brought the lawsuit forward, but it was essentially the government was colluding with big tech to censor, especially during COVID, to censor posts that they didn't like. And so it was brought up that if the government was reaching out to big tech and saying, censor this, and then big tech turned around and said, okay, we censored it. What else do you want us to do?
Well, it's interesting, quote, how big tech has gone full circle because most of the CEOs and boards of big tech are all staunch Democrats. And they were the ones, well, some of those guys and gals are pretty young, so it would have been their families probably and their friends, were the ones that fought vehemently against censorship and this sort of thing. And then they get into positions of power, and they're the very ones now that are working in collaboration with the federal government to censor people.
That's a pretty fun collaboration to work against the people of the United States. And I did look up the quote for Ketanji Brown, quoting, "Your view has the First Amendment hamstringing the federal government in significant ways in the most important time periods. The government actually has a duty to take steps to protect the citizens of this country by encouraging or even pressuring platforms to take down harmful misinformation." I think she, who is supposed to understand our Constitution better than anyone else, our Constitution, Bill of Rights, all the amendments, she seems to think that it is the government's duty to put barriers on the people of the United States, and not that our Constitution actually puts a barrier against the government, not the other way around, that the government is precluded from infringing on people's rights.
Well, I do believe the whole nexus of this U.S. government is the people. Free people are supposed to run the society, not the government. This is not China. This is not communist Russia. This is not any other country that if you say something, just right north of our border, if you say something contrary to a government official, you get your hand slapped when you shouldn't. I think if there is ever a reason or a way to remove a person from an office or from a court, to me, this would be a prime example as to why she has no business being a Supreme Court justice. She's supposed to be there to interpret the Constitution as it is written
and apply it to modern day problems.
Yes.
Because sometimes we seem to have an interpretation issue at a low level, and they are supposed to help make sure that it is across the land being looked at correctly with regard to the Constitution.
And again, there's almost 400 million people in this country. And what is harmful? What's harmful to half the population may not be harmful to the other 50%.
And additionally, if everything's an emergency, you always have an excuse to suppress others.
Yes.
And you always have an excuse to suppress other viewpoints. So in this particular case, we can look at COVID, and they said it was a national health emergency. Now, all these health officials had power that were never granted to them, but they took an immense amount of power from this, and they did whatever they wanted to. Okay, health emergency is over. Now we need to go back to norms, and it's not an emergency. Well, if you don't like the way voting's going, we now have a national voting emergency, and we get to now suppress the opposite viewpoint because we've declared an emergency. And then, 4 years later, we have another emergency, and now we get just declare everything an emergency.
Just like I always say, and you say data, the empirical data generally does not lie. And that's why, as it relates to COVID, now a handful of senators and congressmen are trying to put together a package to get a law passed so people can sue pharmaceuticals for the damage done to them by the shot.
Right. And for those who may or may not remember, initially they gave blanket immunity. So that way anything comes across, it doesn't matter if you end up with a side effect, even if it wasn't a technical listed side effect, you can't sue. What they're trying to say is they either willfully misled people or willfully committed negligence, because that is not covered. That's part of the claim. That is what they are putting forward, that it wasn't just they ended up with a few side effects and they didn't know about them, but that in some cases they knew about the side effects and they knew about the severity, but they lied about how many cases. Like when they say it's 1 in a billion and it turns out to be 1 in 100, that's a pretty significant lie.
Yes, and pharmaceuticals, as everybody knows, has a history of lying.
Yeah, they're not well known for telling the truth. You can go back in history. You can You can use DuckDuckGo. You can use whatever search platform you want to use. You can go back in history and pull up articles upon articles of these individuals losing in court because they got caught fabricating
billions of dollars and removing medicines from the market.
From the market, because they had determined, in some cases, they determined that the payouts that they would pay in court, ruining people's lives, was still financially beneficial. So they would continuing on.
That means I'm right.
Oh,
Ooh,
my goodness.
I was right. Just like with Agent Orange and all kinds of things, military, they play the numbers. And when enough of the people die, then they come out and say, oh, well, yeah, we may have made a mistake. We apologize. We're going to pay you $5,000, but you have to sign this waiver. And even though it's probably now in your system, so your kids are going to be ill, this doesn't cover them.
No. And Agent Orange could potentially pass typically it was a man who was impacted by Agent Orange as far as our U.S. military is concerned. They could pass on heart defects to children, among other issues, but the children aren't covered in that. But another thing that they are now saying, they started talking about the burn pits. And so with the burn pits, it was no connection. And now they're saying, okay. And they came out with a program for veterans to apply because they had been denying for years that there was any connection. And then they finally say, okay, there's presumptive connection if you have these certain conditions. In another case, there was an individual who said that he believed he was impacted by like bombs going off and it rattling his brain.
Shell shocked.
And in some cases, they were saying like, okay, well, you have VA care. We'll go send you for an MRI. We'll go send you for a CT scan. We'll go send you for this. We'll go send you for that. We'll look at all the different ways we could even possibly see your wirings and your connectivity and see if your brain is working the way it's supposed to be doing and everything. Well, he always got told that he was fine. And he's like, I'm not fine. He's saying for years, I'm not fine. There's something wrong. I'm not fine. So he decided when he died, he was going to donate his brain to science so it can get investigated and they could actually like look into his brain and see if there was something wrong. So he passed away, donated his brain to science. Oh, and they are now seeing that there were issues inside of his brain. Now, we don't have the current mass technology to go scan everybody's brain who may have been impacted by an IED or some other form of getting your brain rattled. But unfortunately, it took somebody dying and their brain being donated to science before he was believed.
It always does. And they made those same very statements about football players and the impact damage. And I believe it's called CTE.
Yes.
And they had to actually take a couple of dead guys and do a little experimentation. Lo and behold, when you run into another person doing 5 miles an hour head on, the impact is long-term and everlasting.
Yeah, and they're finding that even little impacts, but a lot of little impacts, so not just for football players, but if you work on the range and you're lobbing grenades day after day, you could be a trainer, military trainer.
Been there.
Yes, that can have an impact on your brain. And the individual who went on the mass shooting in Maine, who was in the Army, I believe he was in the Army National Guard. It was either the Guard or the Reserves. My apologies for not remembering off the top of my head. He worked at the range with grenades. And so they're looking to see if maybe he had... Because they said he was fine until he wasn't, essentially. So over time, if his brain, I think, quit talking, your left side talking to your right side, there was something there that caused it to quit working correctly. But we have to wait for everybody to die. And then there's a couple of people left.
It's amazing what humans do, isn't it, that destroys us? We destroy ourselves, impact damage, chemical damage. marital damage, financial damage, food damage. Man, we're just hard on ourselves, hard on each other.
We are sometimes our own worst enemy. It would seem like. So now, kind of segueing into enemies, we have seen our military ship out. They are on their way to create the port in Gaza. So they're not boots on the ground, but they're providing supplies.
Fins in the water.
And there you go. So we're seeing that. We're seeing them now, our U.S. military members, even though it's not boots on the ground, guess what? They're going to a war zone. So we have now two fronts, two different locations that we're going to among all of our other little things that go on. But we also have Ukraine. We have Biden going with his endless funding of Ukraine. But we're not, he said during his State of the Union that we're not boots on the ground, but didn't we send U.S. military members there, but in a high official capacity? They're not your E1, E2, E3s on the ground who are supposed to be.
Just like Korea, just like Vietnam, just like Iraq and other places in the Middle East, there are advisors embedded with Ukraine, I'm certain. I don't know any personally. And I'm certain that there's advisors embedded in Israel too, even though Israel doesn't want to, nor do they need our assistance on the ground. They just need weapons and money. Actually, more weapons than money. It's interesting you talk about the wars that are going on in two countries, because when I was off work for 8 weeks or 9 weeks, there was something on the news 24/7 about Israel and Gaza and the bombings. You have to look very hard now to find a single article. And I was wondering if the war was over. You really have to look.
I believe we've entered Ramadan. So potentially Israel is not doing as much. I don't know. But that would be really nice if they were to honor other people and their religion. That would be weird.
Yes, it would.
But another thing we have is Chuck Schumer, who is anti-Netanyahu, talks about not believing in their elections and wanting to, I don't know, almost wanting to take matters into his own hands to make sure an elected leader in a foreign country doesn't get to be the elected leader in a foreign country. And that's okay for him to call Netanyahu an obstacle for peace in the Middle East and calling for elections in Israel, and to tell Israelis to pick a different leader. That's okay for him. But if you, here in the U.S., if you say pick a different leader, don't pick Biden, him and others are just on you like there's no tomorrow.
That's January 6th edition. You're a loser. You're anti-American. You're anti-social. You're every anti you can throw out there, when Mr. Schumer, who's probably been in the Senate 140 years, probably doesn't even have to run anymore. He's got his folks in that district so brainwashed they just automatically put his name down without him even spending a dime.
Yep.
Listening to the bile that comes out of his mouth, I'm glad that Mr. Netanyahu responded the way he did. And he was right, he being Benjamin Netanyahu. There's no place in politics for one of our leaders to demand that another democracy dump their duly elected leader. That means they're going against the people. What does that tell you? That he does it here as well. He does
more
it,
than happy to.
Yes, he does it through social media. He does it through all their falsehoods. And this is where we're at right now. You know, even when Trump says something that you can clearly understand what he said, what he meant by it, and the news media runs with it and turns it 180 degrees.
Everything, any word that comes out of his mouth, any set of words that comes out of Trump's mouth is immediately likened to January 6th. He Trump in speaking to auto worker unions over the weekend was talking about how China was building plants in Mexico. And it seemed like the thought process was that cheap cars are going to be imported across the border, and that would put U.S. auto workers out of business. Guaranteed, if a car comes on the market that is made by China but built in Mexico, made by China as in they laid out the money, built in Mexico based on how much money they would outlay for that car and what they could sell it for in America, you would get a car probably under 10K. The reality is maybe 12K. Our cheap cars on the market right now are 15 and above. So I can see them cutting it to 2/3 and even trying to push out the others by undercutting even further, even if it eats into some of their profits so they can get the
100%.
market hold. I could absolutely see them doing that. So Trump is talking about how China has put in these car factories in Mexico, and he said if I'm elected in November, he would put 100% tariffs on them. He would make sure that Americans aren't put out of jobs and that American auto manufacturing would be able to stay. And then if Biden's elected, he kind of did the who knows if he'll do tariffs. Who knows if he'll do tariffs? But 100% it will be a bloodbath, and it will negatively impact the auto workers. They will lose their jobs. It will be a bloodbath. What did they turn that into? Trump said if he's not elected in November, it will be a bloodbath.
Okay, so
no context.
Let's add on to that. So how many people voted for him in the last election?
Was it 80 million?
And out of those 7 million, 5 million of those votes were from Californians, by the way. So if he has 80 million people that voted for him, how many people do you believe would follow him to the White House without even having to go through an election and just throwing everybody that's there out and taking it over? Why?
You mean a real insurrection?
Yes. What I'm trying to get you to think is they're full of crud.
Oh, yeah,
because
absolutely.
If he wanted to do it, and that was really the thought in his mind,
he wouldn't have to wait till November.
Yeah, he'd do it now. He would have done it in January.
Yeah, he would have already done it. So if January was a failure, okay, well, this time we weren't armed, so let's actually arm ourselves, and let's do it in March. Let's do it
This isn't a hypothetical.
Yeah,
people.
I don't. Yeah, please don't think that we're advocating for it. But why would he wait until an election? That makes no sense. He already believes that the prior election was stolen. Why would he wait another 4 years before he insurrected again?
Right, to be sued from multiple fronts and have about 50 to 70% of his wealth stripped from him under illegitimate means and terms.
Right, and as a side thing on stripping his money, he does not have the bond to put up for him to appeal that $454 million decision from the judge there in New York. And the reason for that is when you put up a bond, you don't just write a check for that money. You go to like a bondsman and you give 10% and they put up the bond for you. Nobody will bond that much. And they apparently, it's an unprecedented amount. So nobody will do it.
Right. It's because it was a fraudulent thing.
And
we
so
know that.
Yeah, they picked an amount that's completely unprecedented, especially for there being no victims, especially for everything already being repaid, regardless of whether or not you like the guy. Oh, he got a good deal on his interest rates that the banks didn't complain about, that the banks gave him, my bank at my home purchase still wanted to make sure that they're getting, value for their buck. Okay, your purchase price on the last home that we had was X. They sent somebody out to make sure that it was actually worth that amount of money before they loaned on it.
Well,
they have opportunity.
My bank gave me a great interest rate. You know why? Prior military. So that was that quid pro quo? Is that in the same
That was
realm?
supposed to be an incentive.
Or
but
there you go. Or was I incentivized to go in the military and help protect my country Therefore, a lending institution reciprocated and gave me a favorable rate.
Right. For a good amount of time, I would say for at least a couple of years, the rates for veterans, but for a couple of years, the rates were actually lower for veterans than it was for the regular market. Not a huge amount, but still a good amount. Whereas in years prior, the rates were higher because you didn't have to put 20% down. So they did, for a good amount of years, give veterans a better interest rate. And Trump, being in business for how many decades, why couldn't they just say, dude, sounds good. 1%, 2%, 3%. Oh, you know what? You want us to waive the end of the year? The fact that they would want to do business with them, what does it matter? If the banks gave him a favorable, now they can't turn around and then mess over other people because they don't like them, or because, there's certain
Right, and it sounds like they didn't
legal
do that,
truisms.
and they had done business with him before, so it was a favorable business transaction. But on the other hand, that's what's baloney when a leader, like, let's just go back a couple presidents, go to Obama, okay, starts lending money or giving money to Solyndra. Hundreds of millions of U.S.
I believe
dollars.
that one was $700 million.
Yes. And that company, what?
Went belly up.
Failed. The
within...
executives made money. They walked.
Right. They took all of their money and then they walked away and left everybody.
Where's this fancy
holding
judge?
the bag.
Where's the D.C. circuit? Where are they not pulling him in here and saying, come here, pal. You just lost $700 million of U.S. money. Citizens. You're going to jail.
Absolutely. There were no checks or balances for the hundreds of millions. It was in every contract. That's just one company, one contract. And they were doing it over and over again. Why did we not see massive prison sentences, clawback of money that they took over their houses, and every single thing that we didn't see that? Why?
Yeah. Back during the S&L savings and loan debacle days of the early 80s, that happened nationwide, where savings and loans were failing, just like they were just a few short months ago. But they were taking people and putting them in prison. They were wrecking people's lives, okay, because they were personal business owners and personal CEOs and accountants. And these elected officials somehow were able to get together and vote in a law. Can't arrest me.
They protected themselves, and they get to do everything that we as regular folk aren't allowed to do.
Oh, like Nancy Pelosi in stock trades with her husband?
Yes.
And a list of a bunch of other Republicans and Democrats as well?
Absolutely. Over and over again, we see them buying and selling their stock just before big announcements are made. But we're the problem. And if you look just north of our border, on the people are the problem. So the Canadian government has proposed a law, which Justin Trudeau is right behind. He's proposing that will reportedly allow judges to throw adults in jail for life if they advocate for genocide online. So you don't have to commit genocide, you can advocate for genocide. Why that's important is because what does it mean to advocate for genocide, and who gets to determine when it is genocide and when it isn't? Because if you advocate for a regime that the government is behind, but others are claiming they are committing genocide, are you subject to arrest?
So then when their Canadian actors and actresses make movies about genocide and things like that, did they cross a line
Is
as
that
well?
advocating?
Yeah.
So,
because, there's always political leanings within actors and actresses in their movies with the producers and the writers. So this thing it can spiral completely out of control.
So that's just the start of it, though. If you get into more of the law would allow a judge to impose house arrest and a fine if it were reasonable, or if there were reasonable grounds to believe that a defendant will commit an offense. So now we're in thought police territory.
Theory.
A judge can put somebody on house arrest impose a fine if they believe the defendant will commit an offense.
So if that was the law in the U.S., then every single judge and DA that's trying to go after Trump would put him in jail and fine him.
Because they think he's going to commit a crime. They think he is, therefore it is true.
Well, see, now they're proving to me why I really wanted to go to Canada, because there's some beautiful sights to see. Now I will not ever. And then that's why, as much as I thought I would like to even move someday to Australia, because of what they proved to me during the COVID little mini lockdowns and the protracted lockdowns they had, I will never go to Australia.
This world is a lot different, and my eyes were opened starting essentially March 13th, 2020, and after. Things that I thought could never happen in a Western country.
See, and that's why
they figured out how to surprise the heck out of me.
Well, and that's why I ask you all the time, and I've always asked others about this country, do you think it's the greatest country on earth? Well, maybe at one time it might have been, and that's suspect to certain races that feel that this country has never been justified in even existing. That's why, thinking back just for a second, this Supreme Court justice, her of all people, should have her hand on the pulse of racism and slavery and what happened over the last few hundred years worldwide, to 100% believe that freedom of speech is a fundamental right of this country, and it should never be tampered with nor taken away. And it's her duty to make sure that she reads, understands, and lays out the Constitution with the other justices the way it was meant to be laid out.
Yeah, because if you find a caveat, you don't need free speech when there's a health emergency. You don't need free speech when there's an urgent problem at the southern border. You don't need free speech when another country is in war with a third-party country that has nothing to do with the United States. You can always make exception, and therefore your constitutional rights can always be taken from you. Because the government shall not infringe, not the government gives to you.
Roger that. Agreed, 100%.
Do you think we spend enough time learning history in this country?
We used to, I believe. We no longer do.
Do you believe that if we don't learn history, we may be doomed to repeat it?
We will repeat it.
Do you think that children today, school children, should learn about the Holocaust?
Yes.
Well, Fairfax, Virginia, are going to let students opt out of Holocaust lesson, and they are citing students with different experiences as the reason for allowing them to opt out.
What's interesting, isn't, for the most part, curriculum blind?
It should be.
Yes. So
and
it's a footnote in history. It's not going to rehash itself or take place again unless you do what? Block it out. And don't let kids learn about it.
Yeah, so there was a Holocaust survivor who was going to speak at a particular school, and the school allowed an opt-out that they don't believe that children should have to listen to things that happened in history. Some people even deny the Holocaust ever happened. But you have the biggest extermination of Jewish individuals and others. It wasn't just Jewish individuals. There were other enemies of the state there, or states, as Germany was taking over all of these countries. You have some of the biggest extermination of people, and the response is, you don't have to learn it. You have different experiences.
Thank God they have different experiences, because the poor folks that experience that are not here. Nor, if they were young, like say your age or younger, male, female, and they met, they were married, they were in love, nor will their genes continue on from the point that they walked in that oven till now, or ever.
Right. Because now you have people who call the Jewish individuals in Israel colonizers and oppressors. They have the audacity to call them colonizers after a near worldwide attempt to exterminate them.
Yeah. Speaking of that, going back just a few minutes to when Netanyahu was talking about Schumer, the newscaster asked him about a two-state system, and he made the comment that they're way away from a two-state system now because of what happened, and if you acquiesce to Hamas, then Israel loses, and they'll continue to have to fight for their very survival, just like this here. And he made the statement that they had a state. They had the beginnings of a state. It was called the Gaza Strip. And what did they do with it? They handed it off to, don't call them a terrorist organization, call them whatever you want.
They handed them,
call them a political party.
Them off to a political party. We'll go with that.
And that political parties, what do you call it when they have a thing?
Their credo,
their creed is to exterminate Jews.
Yes.
So they had a state, they had the opportunity, they blew it once again, and Israel and them are now fighting again for each other's very existence. So here we go with wash, rinse, repeat.
We're doomed to repeat. So speaking of things that we repeat, let's talk about voting, and that there was no widespread voter fraud, but we've never identified the definition of widespread. We just kept changing our language around. There was no voter fraud, there was no widespread voter fraud, et cetera, et cetera. So a couple of things that has been brought to my attention for this week. Bridgeport, Connecticut redid their election because there were allegations of voter fraud. And so because there were allegations of voter fraud, including dead people voting, ballot applications being given out like candy, so they're just handing them out. They're not checking to make sure someone's a citizen, whatever. They're just whatever. Ballot harvesting as well. So they had to redo it because of problems. And there has been a new allegation that on the newly completed election, there's more ballot fraud. There's more voting fraud. And I guess there was one individual who voted on the day they died.
Good for them. Did their civic duty before they checked out.
There's all kinds of problems. So there was already a problem. They had to redo it. And now they're seeing much of the same happen again. And then we have Arizona. We won't even talk about Arizona and the 2020 election, but in Arizona, there was a woman, Democrat. Don't read into that I said there is a Democrat that's been convicted. There have been Republicans that are convicted of doing crimes too, and we don't support them. But a convicted Democrat election fraudster, she pled guilty and they dismissed some of the other charges, but she is convicted, has been appointed to vice mayor in the same city that she committed fraud in and pled guilty in. So she just got an appointment. Oh, okay, you committed fraud. So she got a promotion? Yes.
So she was crooked and she got a promotion.
Yeah, so she was a local politician. She was convicted of ballot fraud, and she has now been named as vice mayor.
Wow. So talking about ballot harvesting, I actually heard a major news guy today, commentator. I think his name starts with an S and his last name starts with an H, said that he hopes that this year the Republicans learn how to ballot harvest as well as the Democrats did.
Yes. They need to do, what is it? I do like you does. You need to do like everybody else does. If it's acceptable, we should be doing it.
So is that cheating?
It can't be cheating if it's accessible.
Okay. I thought ballot harvesting was cheating.
It is illegal in many locations, and then each location can have a different definition of what ballot harvesting is. In some locations, you can have up to 3 ballots that you bring in of unrelated people. So if you're at work and your friend Bob says, "Hey Mark, can you take my ballot in for me? I don't have time to get it, and you just said how you're going to go voting." And Bob says, "Here's my ballot. I've already filled it out. I've already sealed it, everything. Can you take it in for me?" And then there's a little signature spot that says that you are having somebody take it in. Depending on where you live, sometimes it has to be a certain relation to you. Sometimes it has to be no relation to you. Sometimes it can only be a specific amount that you can take in. So if you said, "I'm going to go vote," and you're in a county that says you can bring no more than 3 unrelated people to you, bring their ballots in and turn them in, and your whole office of 20 people says, "Hey, Mark, can you take mine in?" No, the answer is no. Legally, you could only take 3 other people's in for them. So there is video of people turning in dozens. In some cases, it appears to be hundreds. And it is not legal in those locations.
So we should try a free-for-all election this year. Let's do a free-for-all. Okay. Everyone in America, everyone, legal and or illegal, anybody that's inside these 4 walls, 18 years of age and older, must vote.
Oh, forced elect. Australia does that. North Korea does that.
If you don't vote, you'll get $100 fine, up to whatever your income level is, a $10,000 fine. You must vote.
Are you sure you don't want to go to Australia? You're starting to sound...
Well, all this ballot harvesting and all this crud we're doing, it doesn't sound any different. It's corruption.
We should...
have an honest election.
One day. Remember when it used to be one day? It was one day you go down in person and you vote.
If people can't drive or they need transportation, for Christ's sakes, we have city buses and county buses everywhere. You drive down 99 here in the Central Valley. You go to around McFarland, maybe a little ways before that. You look to your right. There's a bus depot there of school buses. You can count 1,000 buses.
Go get people on a school bus. Make it a national holiday.
Yes.
Voting is a national holiday. That's our federal election. Every, 4 years for president, every 2 years if you want to do
make it
your Congress people.
Here's a holiday we'll move to that day. Got one for you.
Okay, which holiday?
President's Day.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
Real President's Day.
Yes, we'll make it real President's Day. We're going to be voting for a president on that day. You get the day off. Let's go vote.
Let's do it. I like it. That is something I do like. So let's talk about something that I don't like. Judges who impose sentences on people that are intentionally enhanced for wrongful reasons. Can you think of any cases that have made the news where a judge imposed sentences that were harsher than legally allowed, that they enhance sentences wrongfully?
Well, wouldn't that be the Trump one?
So Trump would be one, and people associated with Trump generally referred to as January 6th. So judges have improperly enhanced sentences of over 100 plus January 6th rioters. They put a Justice Department enhancement on there that has not stood up to legal testing.
Legal muster?
Has not. So now they have to go look at these cases. In some cases, they've already served their time, so you can't get back.
No, you can't take your life back.
No. So they are looking into that right now. Another area of things that are going on, I want to kind of jumping back and forth across the border, go back to Canada. And they're doing the opposite. Instead of judges enhancing sentences,
reducing them,
the police are instructing citizens to not put their car keys in Faraday bags, to not hide their car keys inside their houses, somewhere like completely inside to where somebody can't get to it. There are so many car thieves and so many houses getting broken into so the thieves can snatch the keys to steal the cars that the police have instructed car owners / homeowners or renters to leave the keys out for the thieves so they don't get into a confrontation.
So here again, like when I was at our local Lowe's last week and I saw all of the nice new plexiglass that they were putting up in front of the tools, the criminal has won. Not only have they won here in the U.S., they have won north of the border in Canada. Instead of cracking down, arresting them, fining them, giving them hard duty, whatever.
A real
just letting
punishment.
them run amok and steal your hard-earned stuff just like the tax man does.
Yes. The government doesn't like competition, but I guess this part of it, if you can't beat them, join them. So they're just joined together.
And hence, that's why I look often at other places and where do I think I could live to live out the rest of my life in peace, not have somebody picking my pocket on a continuous basis. And when I say picking my pocket, I'm talking about the tax man.
Yeah, well, if you look, not just the tax man, so we've talked about bills going up. We've talked about, you can talk about inflation and bills going up, but if you put your keys out and your car gets stolen, you have a $500 deductible, you have a $1,000 deductible, whatever your insurance deductible is. Now, I don't know if it works the same way in Canada. I'll admit my ignorance on that part. But if you put your keys out, are you aiding and abetting a theft? Will your insurance company say no dice because you handed over the keys?
Here in the U.S., they would.
Or number two, what has been happening? Insurances are getting canceled. You can't get insurance in some cases because of skyrocketing costs for these insurance companies. So you can't even get insurance. So what do you think is going to happen when everybody is handing over their keys and everybody is putting in their insurance claim? Do you think that, I don't know, we'll see more insurance companies go bankrupt? Now you can't even get insurance. Now your car gets stolen. Guess what? You're out however much money you have a loan on that car.
Think they're trying to get them up there to take public transportation?
Sounds like it.
Is that a conspiracy theory? They're going to drive these people. Drive. Look at that.
They're going to drive them to the bus?
They're going to drive them to public
Absolutely.
transport.
Because they have also said they want to stop maintaining certain public roadways and putting in more roads because they don't want to encourage people to drive cars. And yet here they are saying, please let your stuff get stolen. It's going to get to the point where you can't afford to get a new car. You can't afford the insurance. You can't afford the new car.
I listen to this Huey, and I often, not saying that you're spewing Huey, just Huey that's on the news. Huey Lewis in the news. See, that was pretty good. And I wonder if back when I had my great-great-grandfather around, and then my great-grandfather, and my grandfather, then my father, if they looked at things the same way. And by that I mean, did they read the news and go, oh my God, this country's going to HE double hockey sticks in a handbasket. And then the next generation, then the next. If this is all cyclical and the exact same thing that's been going on, it's just there's more news media outlets so you
can see it
24/7. Because a thief is a thief is a thief. And we're actually learning stuff right now in the Bible.
Yes.
And man, there has been mayhem for thousands of years.
I mean, if you look at the Bible and you go to Genesis, I mean, Cain and Abel, the founding children, so to speak, it started at the beginning.
So obviously, history is doomed to repeat itself, is where I was going with that, and we're not learning from our mistakes.
We are not. We seem to be knocking our heads against the wall, whether it's in Canada, whether it's in Southern California, and they would see the crime rings. There was even a lady that was just arrested for doing a multi-million-dollar scheme on stealing high-end makeup because they could get away with it. She was arrested out of L.A.
Oh, there's one in New York, too. Yeah, she was released on bail after finding body parts or dismembering. She did something with somebody's body, and then she got caught stealing makeup.
Wow. I guess that's why Arizona didn't want to release that killer back to New York, because they said that we believe that New York will let them out on bail. But I want to segue into somebody who may be doing something right.
Thank you. It's about time you notice that I'm kidding.
Yes. We're going to head off to East Palo Alto, California. East Palo Alto. So in the not too distant past, this particular Bay Area city was actually given the title of Murder Capital of the World because it had such high crime rates and high rate of homicide. However,
Palo Alto?
East Palo Alto.
Wow.
Yes.
Isn't that where Stanford's at?
Yeah, I believe so. So over the last 30 years, the city has made its main objective to not only shed that bad moniker, but to do a complete 180 and thrive. One of the main initiatives the city implemented was to start a positive momentum and then focus on the youth and their activities. Focus on the youth. So don't focus on the crime and the problem because you're already there, but they refocused on the youth because the youth would eventually make it into adulthood. And if we're talking cyclical, do what the adults were doing before them. So they did a refocusing in East Palo Alto.
So did they put that thing on the side of their skull and put them in a collective as Borg? Oh, no, just kidding.
Ha ha ha. Now, some are saying that it wasn't as bad as people had indicated, but it was generated by people who weren't actually from there, causing more problems than the people who actually lived there. That is something that we could learn from. We need to break our cycles instead of saying, oh, hey, there's a theft problem. They're stealing cars and they're breaking into houses to do so. You know what? Let's make it easier. Let's just hand over the keys.
Well, you talk about it all the time with the recidivism rate on crime, that there is no training. There's no taking somebody and seeing if you can turn them into a good, more productive citizen or human being, male or female. We just open the door up. It's a revolving door. We put them in, let them out, put them in, let them out, put them in, let them out, and we don't do anything. And I just learned a little bit about that a couple of weeks ago about a couple of organizations, and I think I talked about it briefly, how they actually, after someone has gone through a drug treatment program, there's a real group that actually takes them in and helps them not get thrown back in the rat race and the rat trap so they can become productive members of society. And that goes with the homeless, East Palo Alto. There's places in Arizona, Vegas, LA. We have an issue nationwide with crime, homeless, theft, apparently in Canada with car thieves, Hawaii with ICE. And I don't mean the ICE that arrest people for being there illegal. I mean the drug ICE. We have an issue everywhere. We haven't talked about the state of Aloha in quite a while.
No, we haven't talked about
what is the state of the state. How's Lahaina doing? See, that's another thing that you don't hear about because it burned up.
So from my understanding with people who are living the daily life is that they are not allowing the insurance companies to come in there and assess the damages. They're not allowing them to go and assess. And if they can't assess, they can't cut checks to the insurees. So they are essentially forcing all of these individuals to hold the bag on making mortgage payments because you still have to make your mortgage payments. You can't get the money to pay off those loans to then turn around and get a construction loan to rebuild in the area because you can't start the process. So some people are actually selling out for cash to walk away.
Conspiracy.
Because they can't afford not to. So now you have locals losing their land because the government is intentionally stopping people from being able to use their insurance and rebuild.
That is sad and unfortunate. You know, they do that with squatters too in certain counties.
They give them more rights?
Yes. And then you still have to, even though you may own the home, the rental or whatever, you still have to make the strokes.
Yes, you do. And then if you do ever actually get them out, you have to repair all the damage that has been
And in most
caused.
instances, it's thousands of dollars.
No one usually walks away leaving it better off than when they stole it in the first place.
That'd be nice because I would like, if I ever get another rental, I would like to have a squatter that's a painter.
Just
Just
take
go
care
in
of
and
everything.
repaint the house and take care of it. And you know what? I would be kinder and gentler to someone if they actually had some type of talent, not just go in there and squat and destroy my home.
Speaking of squatters, let's talk about people coming to the United States illegally. So not only do we have a big problem with people crossing the border, they are encouraged to do so because all of these states and municipalities are giving them thousands upon thousands of dollars in benefits.
So let's go. Let's go south of the border and come back up. See if we
Go
can get some
renounce
money.
our citizenship and then come across, or just say, I identify as an illegal immigrant and see what happens. But you have people who are illegally crossing the border, and then all the time we're told how people who are illegally here contribute so much to the economy, therefore it's acceptable that they've committed this unlawful action.
Well, they should. No more free rides.
But now we're seeing that a lot of people are getting a free ride. But something that has been pointed out is that they are leaving hospitals with billions in unpaid bills, because if you're Maria, how many Marias are there? You don't give a real name, a real date of birth. You give like a Jane Doe.
Well, last count, there was 107,300 illegal Marias in Fresno.
So it is estimated that it's a $451 billion in annual costs stemming from the border crisis. A significant portion is going to health care for illegal immigrants. And in addition to them illegally crossing the border, now we have Tyson Foods, who encourages this action, this behavior, because they have been letting go of American citizens in their workforce, letting go of current workers in their workforce, and they have then turned around and said they will hire thousands of migrants and they're going to help pay their immigration bills.
So they used the excuse of automation to get rid of them, and now they're going to turn around. I guess automation means an illegal from another country.
There's no appearance that they've offered the Americans or even lawful permanent residents, it's not just like U.S. citizens, but that they've offered them the opportunity to move to a different location, relocation package. They'll pay for somebody's immigration bills from being illegal, but are they offering relocation packages to get their workers to these other locations that are still open?
Not, but this goes into exactly what we said a few minutes ago, which is someone like Biden, who's the current president, has made this big major mistake. He's costing this country dearly, hundreds of millions, billions of dollars, and we're worried about a business transaction that Donald Trump did many years ago, paid off his debt, paid it with interest. Nobody was dissatisfied. There were no principals hurt in the transaction, yet we're going to let this other individual get away with this.
100% of the time we are. In all appearances, we are letting this happen. And other things that we are letting happen is our military. So we have given Ukraine billions. We have even said we'll shore up your retirement accounts, we'll help you here, we'll help you there, we'll help you everywhere. But what does that mean for our army? Our army, among others, have had massive problems with their barracks, from air conditioning units not working, heating units not working, mold problem, infestation problem. It has gotten pretty bad in some of the living locations. Among other things that have happened, we've talked about how they couldn't feed our military members properly, that if they wanted to go get to the chow hall to get their lunch, it was so far across base and they didn't have enough people staffing it that there wasn't enough time for our soldiers to get fed, as one problem. But anyway, so the Army has asked for increased funding to maintain aging barracks and to build new base housing for junior troops, in one of the most dramatic single budget requests in Congress.
So they should do a Measure E just like Fresno.
So the Army's proposed budget is seeking $2.35 billion for barracks in 2025, which is a boost from $1.5 billion for the year prior.
Well, they can't meet their recruiting goals, so they'll have to build less barracks.
So the U.S. government has sent and committed to more than $44 billion since the beginning of the Biden administration, right? And then there's other little areas that they keep doing fun accounting tricks, and they come up with more money that they magically are able to make happen. But some of the biggest aid, the six biggest areas, $1.6 billion for humanitarian, emergency food assistance, healthcare, etc. Financial, $26.4 billion. Budgetary aid through the economic support funds, loans, and other financial support, $26.4 billion for loans and other financial support. $18.3 billion. Training, equipment, weapons, logistics, support, and other assistance provided through the Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative. That's military, weapons and equipment, $23.5 billion. Grants and loans for weapons and equipment, $4.5 billion. But let's go back. Financial, budgetary aid through the Economic Support Fund, loans, and other financial support, $26.4 billion. If we do not say yes to fixing our own barracks and we're leaving our military members in squalor, we have a problem. We are fixing every other country but our own. Why is that? I have lived in bad barracks. I have lived in...
As have I.
I ended up living in barracks that were actually condemned. They were getting ready to be torn down. It was set up for the tear down. They were just going through each location and clearing it out before they would take it down. And then Hurricane Ivan happened. A bunch of us got stuck on hold in Chicago. We couldn't go down to Pensacola, Florida. And they uncondemned the condemned barracks.
Just like waving a wand. It's like magic.
Magically, there's no more problems with this location. Never mind the mold, the asbestos, all of that fun stuff. Side story. One of the things that I got, that I failed an inspection on inside of my room in the barracks, was that I did not clean my trash can to military specifications. There was a rust hole all the way through the trash can. And so my hit was for not cleaning the trash can. And I'm like, I literally cleaned it, but I can't remove rust and it's a hole. Somehow the inspector, this petty officer, determined that meant it wasn't clean. I don't know how I was going to clean it any different out of this condemned barracks with rusted through trash cans. So when the chief came around to inspect, saw that it was a trash can, looked at the trash can, looked at me, and just turned around and walked away. And we were dismissed. It was so stupid.
It was petty.
It was very petty. But stuff like that, I understand, okay, a little bit of rust on a trash can, but a condemned barracks. This is what we're housing people in. And that was 2 decades ago.
It's because they're not looking after number one, which is us. They're treating us like number two.
And if you don't take care of your own people, what do you expect? Because now your people don't want to support you.
Yes, and I think that if you look at the numbers, there was a wild number thrown out sometime today that all the money we've thrown at Ukraine, it works out to about $18,000 per tax-paying individual in America, amongst all the other money we give out to
everybody else when we're
other countries around the world, and we don't take care of our own.
We don't.
Homeless,
over and
terrible,
over again.
Roads are terrible. I know we
need to stop with a lot of these. The programs that they say are going to fix our lives, they don't. So let's just stop with that and let's have real world people. Case in point, the gentleman that you had breakfast with, the one that spoke, real people with real solutions. Come in. Stop with these fake solutions.
I heard a guy today on the radio say that he has a lot of answers and solutions to fix all these problems that people are asking about. And he said one of the first ones is, if you have a problem, you need to come with me with 3 fixes or 3 solutions. If you don't have at least 3, you are part of the problem.
So when I was going through a lot of management training and supervisory training, one of the things that was taught was to have at least one. So three is great, but to have at least one, don't just name off every problem. You better start coming with solutions.
Come with answers, come with solutions.
Yes, absolutely. So speaking of solutions, so something that the National Health Service, let's go over to England. We're already near Europe. Let's go to England. So NHS is someone that the United States started following when giving care to minors who may have a gender dysmorphia. And they believe themselves to be transgender. So the National Health Service of England has issued a ban on puberty blockers for children who identify as transgender. And it's based on it based this decision to ban puberty blockers for children for there not being enough evidence of the procedure's safety or clinical effectiveness. The UK government also endorsed the landmark decision, hailing it as being in the best interest of the children.
Yeah, so they don't have enough. Ooh, my favorite line, empirical data.
They don't have enough
They're
data.
going off of emotion.
Yes.
And not off of reality.
Yes.
And you have to let them kids grow up a little bit until they're able to make a decision on their own as a 18, 19, 20, 21-year-old. Then they can make those changes.
Yes, because as an adult, there is a particular individual that I have started. So she had surgery to become a he. And while I was following this individual, they didn't find out. They were an adult when they made the decision to do the surgery. They didn't find out until after the fact that there was an over 60% failure rate of the surgery and the need to have continual surgeries after and to potentially die.
And you're on medication your entire life.
And when they were told, even as an adult, it was billed as something that will, like pie in the sky, you will change to this other gender and everything will be perfect. To the point where the doctor would no longer answer them or help them after they got so far along in still having trouble post-procedure. And they said, they are saying, I was an adult and I didn't know all of this, but now I know all of this. Imagine what the kids don't know.
100%. Speaking of transgenders, is it true that Leah Thomas has had a girlfriend the whole time?
Yes.
I was wanting to make sure I didn't mishear that.
No, Leah Thomas has had a girlfriend the whole time. Leah Thomas has never had what they call bottom surgery, so to like actually surgically change to what you identify as. So when Leah Thomas would change in the locker room, it was a 6'3" male body changing in the female locker room, regardless of what Leah Thomas decided to identify as. Okay. And I'm not saying if Leah Thomas would have had surgery, then that makes everything all fine and dandy as far as competing, having grown in a male body, having the male lung capacity, having the male musculoskeletal structure, all of that. That is a different topic. But in the locker room, 6'3" male body in a female locker room has had a girlfriend the entire time. And now NC2A women who competed in the collegiate or at the collegiate level are suing the NC2A for forcing them into these situations.
As they should.
So one of the things that we've already mentioned on this show and just today, as far as having data informs our decisions. Having the empirical data to inform your decision and to understand trends is also important. You can understand trends in crime by looking at the data. Now you may have to get into the meat and potatoes to figure out why things are trending that way, but we can see trends just from a statistical standpoint. So why is it that in New Jersey, individuals in the inmate database are being coded as being of the wrong ethnicity, the wrong race.
Is that AI?
It's not AI. We have individuals who are saying that like white violent extremists is a rising threat. Literally every criminal is white now. If you listen to some of the media and the FBI, that there are a huge rise in white crime. If you look in New Jersey as an example for the inmate database, you can pull African American gentlemen looking at their face and their features and what they look like. They are being listed as Caucasian. So if you list everybody, regardless of their actual race, as Caucasian, it's going to look like there's a huge increase in the number of white people committing crimes.
Yes, they're skewing the numbers.
So now I used to give a lot of deference to the FBI and the crime statistics and things that are going on, even in my history of working in the criminal justice system and working on my degree. I would pull numbers, those stats, so I could write my papers and do further research. And I was even going for my PhD. I would pull that information. And now it's all trash. What can we get from it if we're not actually being truthful?
Well, yeah, it's just, thank you. That's a very good word. I was just going to say that's a lot of non-truth tellers. And like I hear all these pundit experts say all the time, well, it's not the rank and file that are the bad ones. Well, all the ones that are on the top now were at one point in time rank and file, which means that they either had corruption in their mind and heart back then, or they didn't develop it until money and power and things of that nature came to light for them. However, there are folks at the normal level that will arrest pastors, that will take them away in chains, that will go contrary to what their heart is probably telling them, and they'll do wrong. So there's just as many at the lower levels that will do exactly what you just so eloquently explained as there are people at the top that are in charge of them. Sorry, I hate to say it, you have criminality with criminals, with law-abiding citizens, because not all of them are law-abiding and honest. Yes, if we were, there would not be thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of laws nationwide to keep us in check.
True story. So I would like to segue into coming back to California, still talking about individuals like Leah Thomas. In California, they have said and started early that if an individual identifies as, if a child identifies as transgender in school systems, they will start changing their pronouns in the school. They will change the child's record. They will start addressing them as such. They will let them live out their opposite sex self without telling the parents. They will say that the parents could be harmful, but yet this teacher that has no idea and hasn't lived with your child for the last 12 years somehow magically knows better. And California has made that easier. And in divorce proceedings, you can end up getting custody of a child if you accuse the other parent of not supporting their real gender identity. You can lose custody if you don't support your child's change in gender identity, even if you were never told about it. And we have cases where they have started allowing children to pursue surgery before they reach the age of majority, before they're even 18, without parental permission in some cases. So I'm just laying the ground there that we think that 12-year-olds in California are of a sound mind.
Yeah, we should let them vote this year in the 2024 election.
To vote, no, to change their body through chemicals to allow them to take whatever drugs. I mean, if you ever try to read those drug sheets that come with the pills, they're crazy. But to take drugs we're saying that they fully understand the side effects of that drug, that they can potentially have surgery before the age of 18 to fully, gender affirm, etc. So California, in its infinite wisdom, is pushing to ban flaming hot Cheetos in a new bill from being in California schools. Now, it's not just flaming hot Cheetos. It's things with blue dye 1, blue dye 2, green dye 3, red dye 40, yellow dye 5, and yellow dye 6, as well as other coloring agents, and it gets into these artificially tinted foods. Kids aren't intelligent enough to either eat red dye or not eat red dye at school.
But they can chemically burn their genitalia.
Yes. They can have pills and surgeries and other care. I believe they're also allowed to get an abortion without parental knowledge. They are allowed all of this bodily autonomy that at 12, they're also considered to just be fully understanding and aware of everything, except when it comes to red dye.
I know a lot. Well, I've been around 12-year-old kids, and they got a lot to learn. But if they're as good as California says they are now, I want them working at 12. I want them in the factories. I want them making money, paying taxes.
Right, start them young. Let's just stop their education.
We had laws that prevent that. Why? Because child labor laws were very important back in the day.
Now they need to be undone because children deserve all of their own independence.
Yeah, they should be paying for this treatment, not being on their parents' insurance until they're 26 years old.
Yeah, why do they need insurance until they're 26 if they're fully...
An additional 14 years? Come on.
This has been a podcast produced and edited by the Dirt Sailor duo. Mark and Shannon are a father-daughter team who both served in the United States Navy. This production is protected by copyright laws. Until next time, anchors away.